The laughter echoed through the break room like a cruel joke. "Can you believe they let someone like him walk in here?" a voice sneered. "Probably lost, looking for a janitor's closet," another voice chimed in, followed by a chorus of chuckles. Darren Williams stood just outside the doorway, his hands in his pockets, listening. He had walked into the company's headquarters that morning, eager to introduce himself to the employees he had just taken over as CEO. But instead of a warm welcome, he was met with cold stares, whispering, and now, this. He had decided to test the waters first, dressing in a simple button-up and slacks instead of the designer suit he had worn to the board meetings. It hadn't taken long for the judgment to start. Now standing there, hearing their words, he could feel something tightening in his chest. Not sadness, not anger, but something stronger, a need to teach them a lesson. Just as he took a step forward, the worst of them all, the man who had been leading the insults, a middle-aged employee named Greg, walked right past him, not even bothering to hide the disgust in his expression. Darren's jaw clenched. Greg had no idea. None of them did. But they were about to find out. Darren walked into the main office space, his posture calm, his expression unreadable. The open floor was bustling with employees, phones ringing, keyboards clacking, conversations flowing. Some people gave him quick glances, but dismissed him just as fast, assuming he was someone unimportant. A receptionist named Lisa, one of the few people who hadn't given him a dirty look, approached him. "Sir, are you looking for someone?" Before Darren could answer, Greg and his group walked in, still laughing among themselves. Their laughter stopped when they saw Darren standing in the middle of the office. "What's he still doing here?" one of them muttered. Greg smirked, walking over with exaggerated confidence. "Hey, buddy, you lost?" Darren raised an eyebrow. "Lost?" "Yeah," Greg scoffed. "This isn't the maintenance wing." Darren let the silence hang between them. He could feel the weight of the moment, how everyone was watching now. Some employees had stopped typing. A few stood by the water cooler, listening. Greg wasn't done. "If you're looking for a job, I hear they're hiring downstairs, something more, suited to your kind." The room went still. A few people gasped. Some shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Darren tilted his head. He could feel his heart pounding, not from anger, but from restraint. He had spent years proving himself. Climbing the corporate ladder, working twice as hard, being twice as good, just to sit at the table with men who looked down on him. And now here he was, standing in front of an office full of people who had no idea they worked for him. He took a deep breath and smiled. "That's interesting," he said, keeping his voice even. "Because, as of this morning, I'm the new CEO." The silence that followed was deafening. Greg's smirk faded instantly. His face turned pale. The other employees exchanged shocked looks, their eyes darting between Greg and Darren. Lisa, the receptionist, gasped. "Oh my God, you're Mr. Williams." Darren nodded. Greg's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again, as if trying to form words but failing miserably. That's not possible." "Oh, but it is," Darren said, his smile never wavering. "And I think we need to have a conversation, in my office. Now." Greg swallowed hard, his bravado gone. The entire room watched as Darren turned and walked toward the executive suite at the end of the hall. Without another word, Greg followed, his steps slow and hesitant, as if he were walking toward his own execution. The door shut behind them. And then, silence. Di in the office dared to move. They all knew. Greg was about to face consequences he never saw coming. The door clicked shut, sealing Greg and Darren inside the CEO's office. It was a large space, modern and sleek, with a long glass window overlooking the city skyline. A mahogany desk sat in the center, flanked by two black leather chairs. Greg hesitated before stepping forward, his hands twitching at his sides. Darren walked calmly around his desk, taking his time as he lowered himself into the chair behind it. He didn't say anything at first. He simply stared at Greg, letting the silence do its job. Greg shifted on his feet. "Listen, Mr. Williams. Darren held up a hand. "Sit." Greg swallowed and obeyed. Darren leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. His eyes never left Greg's face. "Tell me, Greg," he said, his voice controlled but firm. "What exactly did you mean back there, when you said something more suited to my kind?" Greg stiffened. His mind raced. I didn't mean anything by it," he stammered. "It was just, workplace banter. A joke." Darren tilted his head. "A joke?" Greg forced a laugh. "Yeah, man. I didn't mean any offense. You gotta admit, it was a little funny." Darren's smile disappeared. "Tell me what's funny about it." Greg's throat bobbed as he swallowed again. "Look, I was just messing around. I didn't know you were the new boss." Darren let out a dry chuckle. "Ah, so if I wasn't the boss, then it would have been okay." Greg opened his mouth, then snapped it shut. His fingers gripped the arms of the chair. Darren nodded slowly. "That's what I thought." He leaned back. "Let me tell you a story, Greg. A few years ago, I applied for an internship at a company just like this one. I had all the qualifications, high GPA, work experience. But during the interview, the manager, someone who reminded me a lot of you, asked if I was sure I was in the right place." Greg's fingers twitched. Darren continued. "I didn't get the job. You know why? Because I wouldn't fit the company culture." His voice hardened. "So I built my own company, and now that company owns this one." Greg paled even more. "Mr. Williams, I swear, I didn't—" "I know exactly what you did," Darren cut him off. "And I also know that you're not the only one. This entire department has a problem. Do you know how many complaints have come across my desk about you?" Greg's face turned bright red. Darren slid a folder across the desk. Greg hesitated before picking it up. His eyes widened as he flipped through the pages. Formal complaints from employees. Accusations of racist comments, unfair treatment, denied promotions. "I could fire you right now," Darren said. Greg's head snapped up. "I could walk you out that door and make sure you never work in this industry again." Darren's voice was like steel. "But instead, I'm going to do something worse." Greg's breathing turned shallow. "Worse?" Darren nodded. "You're going to stay, and you're going to watch as everything changes, every policy, every leadership decision, every hire and promotion. This department will be rebuilt, and you will have no power in it. You will answer to people you once looked down on. You will sit in meetings where your opinion is no longer needed, and you will learn, firsthand, what it feels like to be treated as less than." Greg's mouth opened, but no words came out. "You wanted to remind me of my place." Darren's voice dropped to a whisper. "Now I'll remind you of yours." A sharp knock at the door interrupted the moment. "Come in," Darren called. The door swung open, and two HR representatives walked in, their expressions unreadable. "This is Ms. Carter and Mr. Lee from Human Resources," Darren said. "They'll be handling your new role in this company." Greg's hand started shaking. "Mr. Williams, please!" Darren stood up, his ion unreadable. "Welcome to your new reality." Greg sat frozen as the HR reps stepped forward, ready to discuss his fate, and outside the office, the employees who had witnessed his cruelty for years sat in silence, waiting for the shift they never thought would come. Greg sat in stunned silence as the HR representatives closed the office door behind them. His palms were sweaty, his mouth dry, his mind raced. This had to be a mistake, some kind of sick joke. Ms. Carter, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, adjusted her glasses and took a seat across from him. Mr. Lee remained standing, his arms crossed. "Greg," Ms. Carter began, flipping open a folder. "We've reviewed the complaints against you, and after discussing the matter with Mr. Williams, we've come to a decision." Greg clenched his fists under the table. "A decision?" Ms. Carter nodded. "Effective immediately, you are being removed from your current position as floor supervisor." His stomach dropped. "Wait, what?" "You'll still be employed by the company," she continued, "but in a different role, one more aligned with your, let's say, capabilities." Greg's heart pounded. I've been working here for over a decade. You can't just demote me." Mr. Lee raised an eyebrow. "Actually, we can. This is a joke, right?" Greg let out a nervous laugh. "Okay, I messed up. I get it. But I don't deserve this. I was just what?" Darren's voice cut through the room. He had been silent, observing. Now, he leaned forward, resting his arms on the desk. "Just showing your true self?" Greg's mouth opened, then closed. "You had years to change," Darren continued. "Years to treat people with respect. You chose not to. So now, you'll have to live with that choice." Miss Carter pushed another document toward Greg. "Your new position," she said, "will be in the mailroom." Greg's head snapped up. "You're kidding," Darren smirked. "Not at all. The mailroom." Greg's voice cracked. "That's where the interns and new hires start. Seems Itting," Mr. Lee said. "Consider it an opportunity to learn." Greg shook his head. "This is humiliating. You can't expect me to—" "You're free to resign," Miss Carter interrupted. Greg flinched. Darren tilted his head. "That's right, Greg. You can quit. Walk out that door right now. But if you do, good luck finding another company that'll hire you with the complaints on your record." Greg's body stiffened. He knew Darren was right. He'd seen people blacklisted from the industry before. If he left now, he'd be lucky to find a job managing a gas station. He swallowed hard. His only option was to stay. Miss Carter folded her hands. "So, do you accept the new position?" Greg's jaw clenched. Every fiber of his being told him to walk out, to tell them all to go to hell. But he had a mortgage, a car payment, a lifestyle that required money. He forced himself to nod. "Yes." Darren's smirk widened. "Perfect." Miss Carter handed him the papers. "Sign at the bottom." Greg grabbed the pen with shaking hands and scribbled his name. Darren stood. "Welcome to the mailroom, Greg." Greg didn't respond. He couldn't. "Report to your new supervisor at 8 a.m. sharp," Miss Carter instructed. "And just so you know," she glanced at Darren before looking back at Greg, "your new boss, she's one of the employees you mistreated." Greg's stomach twisted into knots. Darren walked around the desk and opened the door. "You're dismissed." Greg stood, his legs heavy, and walked toward the door. As he stepped out, he locked eyes with the employees still gathered outside. The same people he used to belittle, the same people he thought were beneath him. And now, they were above him. Greg kept his head down and walked away. But as he left, Darren's voice echoed in his mind. "Welcome to your new reality." Greg sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly, his knuckles turned white. His heart pounded in his chest. The humiliation, the rage, the disbelief, it all swirled inside him like a storm. Just yesterday, he had been a supervisor. He had power, authority, respect. Now, he was a mailroom worker, answering to people he once looked down on. He took a deep breath and forced himself to calm down. "You can handle this. It's just temporary. Keep your head down, do the work, and maybe you'll find a way back up." He started the engine and drove home. But as he walked into his house, he saw his wife, Linda, waiting for him in the living room, arms crossed. "I got a call," she said, her voice cold. Greg's stomach tightened. "A call from who?" "From someone at your office." She narrowed her eyes. "They told me what happened." Greg exhaled sharply. "Linda, Demoted to the mailroom, she snapped. "After all these years, how? Why?" Greg ran a hand through his hair. "It's complicated. Some new executive, Darren Williams," Linda cut in. "Your boss." Greg flinched. She knew. "Did you really?" She hesitated, her voice softer now, almost as if she couldn't believe what she was about to say. "Did you really mistreat the employees?" Greg turned away. "Greg." He swallowed hard and faced her again. I may have been a little hard on them." Linda shook her head, stepping closer. "That's not what I asked." Greg sighed. "Fine. Yes, I was tough on them, but I had to be. That's how you get things done. You don't coddle people in the workplace." Linda stared at him for a long time before speaking. "And how did that work out for you?" Greg didn't answer. He didn't have to. Linda shook her head, rubbing her temples. "You need to fix this." "Fix what?" he scoffed. "I already lost. What do you want me to do?" Linda's expression hardened. "Be a better person, Greg." The next morning, Greg walked into the building, feeling every pair of eyes on him. It wasn't just paranoia. People were whispering, snickering, shaking their heads. He ignored them and went straight to the mailroom. When he stepped inside, a woman in a crisp blouse and slacks stood at the center of the room, handing out assignments. Greg's breath caught. It was Vanessa. He remembered her, how he used to call her incompetent, how he'd laugh with other supervisors about how she'd never make it in the company. And now, she was his boss. Vanessa turned, saw him, and smiled. "Oh, Greg, right on time." He forced a tight smile. "Morning." She held out a clipboard. "Your assignments for the day." Greg hesitated, then took it. As he looked over the list, he heard chuckles from some of the other workers. "I know this is a big change for you," Vanessa said, her voice calm. "If you have any questions, let me know." Greg clenched his jaw and nodded. "Got it." Vanessa studied him for a moment before adding, "And Greg?" He looked up. "You might want to treat people with respect this time." Greg said nothing. He just turned and got to work. And for the first time in his life, he knew what it felt like to be at the bottom. Did you enjoy the story? Like, share, and follow for more.